Hey everyone, and welcome to another Sasquatch Theory podcast. On this episode, we have Michelle from the state of Oregon, and she had some Bigfoot encounters that took place many years ago on the Pacific Northwest coast. When people think of the existence of Bigfoot, they generally think of the Pacific Northwest, and it's an excellent place for Sasquatch to live at, and there's a lot of sighting reports that come out of the area, and I think it would be an excellent place for people to do research. Of course, it's very vast, and it would be easy to get lost and for something to go wrong. There's a lot of people out there who have interacted with Sasquatch in the state of Oregon, and it seems like these creatures like to gift people and leave very intricate things behind, such as woven toys made out of sticks. And the stories from Mount St. Helen are just mind-blowing, and it makes me wonder why they named Ape Canyon. And a lot of those names are here in Missouri as well, as far as like the Devil's Backbone or Monkey Mountain, and it makes you wonder why these places have these names set in place. If you guys enjoy Bigfoot encounters on Sasquatch Theory, please be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment down below. And of course, if you have a Bigfoot or cryptid encounter that you would like to report to the channel, please contact me sometime at sasquatchtheory@outlook.com. Alright, with all that being said, let's dive into Michelle's Bigfoot encounters from the state of Oregon. All right, Michelle, welcome to Sasquatch Theory. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, and how are you?
I'm doing excellent. Thank you so much for asking, and it's a pleasure to have you on the show. Michelle, if you would, tell me a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and your Bigfoot encounters and experiences from the very beginning, please.
I was born in Silverton, Oregon, and lived on my grandparents' farm for the first 6 months of my life while my dad was serving in the Air Force in Alaska. And my mom lived on the farm, and then primarily lived in Portland for a short time, but actually grew up in Gresham, Oregon. And my siblings, my brothers were born in California during the 2 years we were there, and then we came back. My sister was born in Portland, and we primarily as a family spent a couple years in Portland, a couple years in Silverton, Oregon as a young family, but then starting in 1973, we spent the rest of our growing up years in Gresham. And my dad worked really, really hard, and we were kind of lower middle class. But every year, he always made sure that we got to go to the beach at least twice a year, always in July and a week in August. And I think that this was probably the beginning of our Bigfoot experiences, but we didn't realize it at the time until we became older adults. But I'll just tell you that we would go to Beverly Beach State Park, which is down and around the central part of the coast of Oregon. It's between Lincoln City and Newport. And the place has now changed very much. The area that was the rainforest area where we hung out is now collapsed. It's no longer there. But it was a restricted area. There was a sign that said, restricted, do not enter. It was about 200 yards from our campsite, from the main camping areas. And this was the only state park that we went to that had three forest rangers that were always on duty in a cart, traveling around the campsites and also walking through the camp area at night. And we could never figure out why. But we thought that was really interesting that they were always on patrol. When we went to Fort Stevens on occasion, there was never that kind of patrol going on. But always at Beverly Beach State Park, there was three shifts, always patrolling. Now, we found this restricted area, and we didn't see the sign. We were kids. And we just climbed at about a 45-degree angle to climb up this area. And it was a Pacific rainforest area. It was beautiful. It was, the only thing different about it was dead silent. It was just dead silent. There were no bird sounds, no insect sounds, and it was just a very quiet place. And we were very over-disciplined children, growing up in a really strict household, grew up in the church. we were not allowed to talk in the car when we went for drives. We were told to be quiet. So if you can imagine 4 kids not allowed to make noises for up to 2 hours, we were just that disciplined. So when we went into this area, we were very quiet. We didn't touch we saw these big grassy nests. We didn't touch them. We just looked at them with interest. We saw these A-frame type shaped trees that were bent and put together funny, and we couldn't figure out what that was. But we just thought maybe an artist had been up there and put those together. We didn't realize until watching documentaries as adults that that's things that Bigfoot do. But we didn't know that that's what those were. We just admired them. It was really quiet, and I think the first thing we heard was a whoop whoop sound. And my brothers, being mischievous, whooped back. And whatever this thing was, we thought it was a person, whooped back. And then there was wood knocking. And my brothers developed a code where they would knock twice, would knock once, and would knock three times. This is a pattern they developed. And whoever this was would copy that. And so we did that every time we went into this, what we called our secret area, that we went up there. And there were no people up there. It was just us. And there were a couple of deer that would come up to Sheldon, my brother Sheldon, who's the youngest of the identical twins, and would come up to Sheldon and actually sniff him out, and he would pet him. And those are the only animals I recall really seeing up there. It was like everything else was really quiet. And we would make our way to the edge of this rainforest area where we were on the headland, where we could see the ocean. And we would sit there for hours and just watch the ocean because it was soothing to us, because we were abused children in a neighborhood that was predominantly white, but all around us was different races, but primarily black. And this was during a time in Portland in the 60s and early 70s where we got beat up a lot. There was a lot of racism. And it was really hard growing up in that area. And it was just a lot of racial tension. And we were taught to just not see color. We were taught that everybody is important in Jesus' eyes. And so we didn't fight back, but we got beat up a lot. So when we went to the beach, it was a vacation from everything. And so we went up into this rainforest area that was so quiet. It was so soothing. And our mom knew that we would go up in this area, and our dad did, and they gave us lunches, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. And we set them on this stump. And we were going to come back later and eat them, and they were gone. The whole sack was gone, and in its place was these shells and these rocks. And we thought, oh, our first thought was a homeless camper took them and didn't have any money and gave us these, trinkets. So we told our parents about it, and our parents felt sorry for this homeless camper. So when we were going to go up, the next afternoon to our, what we called our secret place, they gave us extra lunches to put up on the stump. And we kept ours with us, and then we put these lunches on the stump. And sure enough, we did our whoops, and then we did our wood knocks, and then we went about our business. But we didn't touch the nests or anything that we saw, and just went right to the area where we could see the beach. And when we were done for the day, we came back by the stump, and the lunches were taken. And again, there were these fossil rocks and shells and twisted kind of little twig things that were left in its place. Now, realize we would come in July for a week, we'd come in August for a week, and this was our pattern for almost 12 years doing this. And we had no clue we were entertaining anything. But the interesting thing that I think about now as an adult is we would climb down, and the forest ranger would be standing there saying, "What are you guys doing up there? Do you know it's restricted?" He showed us the sign, and I said, "Well, we're just going up there to watch the ocean." And he said, oh, okay. And my brother said, "Yeah, we do the whoops, and somebody whoops back," and the ranger just turned 10 shades of white and looked at us like, "Are you guys crazy?" And And we said, yeah, there's nothing going on up there. There's just a homeless camper we're feeding. We told him what we were doing and what happened, and this guy just got really upset. And he says, where are your parents? And he told our parents what was going on. And they said, yeah, so? He says, is there somebody up there that they should be afraid of? Well, no. Well, no, I guess everything's okay. He never told us anything about anything being up there, which I, as an adult now, I find kind of disturbing. Because if he thought there was a Bigfoot up there, he should have told my parents. But I guess they just wanted to keep everything quiet. And, you know, they finally got to know us when we come every year. It was the same rangers most of the time. We got to know them. They say, oh, it's the Reed children. And they'd watch us go up there, and then we'd come back down, and we were just grinning and smiling, having had a nice afternoon. And this went on for years, and we never realized it. So now in 1974 is about the best I can recall. It was probably about August, and I've looked up the BFRO report and found one about, it was made about 3 days after our incident because there were reports on this. We went to a place my dad's military friends said that they found a new lake in the Mount Hood National Forest. The Corps of Engineers were working on making a new camping and fishing and overnight use area, day use area, and they found this lake. And my dad called it Lost Lake, but I don't think that that's what the name of the lake was, because there was already a Lost Lake in Mount Hood National Forest, a big place. So this was just a small lake they found with big fish in it. It was a pristine lake. And we probably got about 7,000 to 10,000 foot level on the mountain on a dirt road. We left the paved roads and we're on a dirt road finally. That's what I can recall. I was about 11 years old, and my brothers were 9, and my sister, she was about, I think, 4 years old. She stayed with my parents while they laid out a tailgate picnic, and my brothers and I went down a game trail. And you could see the lake. My dad wanted to fish out of it, but couldn't get close enough because there was about a 3-foot area around it that had a lot of brush and stuff still around it. And they went down the game trail, and I stayed by the lake. And I was interested in looking at the fish because I'd never seen fish that big before in my life. They must have been about 2 to 3 feet in length. And I was just looking around, and Shannon and Sheldon went down the game trail. Well, they were kind of Shannon was running because he was a runner. And Shannon couldn't talk about this with me until about 40 years later because he was so shocked by what happened. And he and I recently talked about this. I'm now 62 years old, and he's 60. And we finally had a conversation about this about a month ago. And he was able to tell me in detail, and this is what he told me. He said, I was running down the game trail, and I tripped. And I kind of flew through the air, and I landed on something. And he says, I basically did a face plant into the chest of what I now know was a female Bigfoot, actually into its chest. My feet were kicking in the air. And she was squatted using the bathroom. I think she was taking a crap. And she lifted me up in the air with her hands, and she was looking at me in the face. And he says, at the time, I was so shocked. I don't know if I was scared yet, but I was looking at her trying to figure out what she was. And I realized she wasn't human. And she tried to smile at me, like her like her lips went into kind of a curl, like a smile. I could see her teeth, and her eyes were really big, and they were brown, and she had orangey brown hair, and she made this sound, sh, sh, like she was trying to laugh or make a chuckle, is what he remembers. Like she was seeing the humor in the situation. As a child, he couldn't figure it out, but as an adult, he's looking back at his memories and said it was like she was trying to see the humor that he landed on her like that. And she lifted him up in the air and just studied him. And then she gently set him down on the ground. And they had eye contact for a few more seconds. And then finally his fight or flight kicked in. And he said he just turned around and ran. And then it finally kicked in. He started crying. And my twin brothers are developmentally disabled and developmentally delayed and didn't talk till they were 5. And his twin is actually mentally challenged. While that happened to Shannon, Sheldon was skipping along the trail, and he heard a sound, and he turned toward a tree and saw a very hairy man peeing on a tree. And Sheldon, at first, he said, we talked about this about 2 months ago, and he said at first he was really offended. He thought, what are you doing? He said, our mom taught us that you don't pee out in public. And he thought, this man is being very rude, and he's naked. He was really incensed at the idea this guy was naked. And he got mad. He was going to tell the guy, what are you doing out here peeing naked in the woods? And the other thing that got him was the guy had this ginormous penis. He'd never seen a penis that big in his life. And I know that's exactly what he said. And it scared him then because he thought, who has something that big? And then he looked up into its face and realized that that it wasn't human. And he thought to himself, you're not human. What are you? And he was so mesmerized by that he couldn't move for a moment. And then his brother Shannon came running by and said, we have to get out of here. There's things in the woods here. There's things in the woods here. We have to get out of here. And he noticed his brother was crying, and he was shocked looking at this thing that he was looking at, that he followed his brother. And then he said because Shannon was crying, he started crying. And they're running. So now they're having this experience. Meanwhile, I'm at this small lake, and I finally look up across the lake, and it's only about 50 feet. And I see this very tall, brown thing. It's not a bear. It's too big, and it's standing on 2 feet. And I'm looking at it, and I'm not scared because I can't figure out what it is. And I'm staring at this thing, and I notice, okay, it's got long arms down past its waist. The shadow, the sun it was a bright sunny day, and it was standing in shadow, but there was sun dappling through the trees. So I could see the sun shining on parts of it. I noticed it had fingers. And I thought, okay, bears don't have fingers. We'd been to the zoo as kids. We'd seen bears. And so I knew that this wasn't a bear. It wasn't a monkey. It was too big. It reminded me of a monkey, but it was too big to be a monkey. It wasn't a gorilla because it wasn't shaped like a gorilla, but it was tall and had big shoulders. Its head was round. I couldn't see its eyes because it was just too far away, but I could see that its face was flat when the sun shined across it, when the trees would move. And it was standing in a way that it was leaned up against the tree with his arm across the tree. His head was against his arm, standing in a pose with his one foot with the knee bent, foot cocked up, just looking like a child that was going to play Ollie Ollie Oxenfree. That's what came into my mind. And I thought, that is so weird. And then it turned to face me. And I just noticed how long his arms were, and I could see fingers. And I kept staring at this thing, looking at me. I'm looking at it, looking at me, looking at it, and I'm thinking, what are you? It's not making any move toward me. I don't feel threatened. I just am fascinated because I can't figure out what it is. And we weren't allowed to watch much TV. Our TV watching was really restricted. So we didn't have a really big fund of knowledge of anything strange or weird. So we'd never heard of Bigfoot. And up to this point. And about that time, my brothers came running down behind me, crying, yelling, we have to get out of here. There's things here. And I said, yeah, no kidding. And I turned to look at them. And then when I turned back, what I'd been looking at was gone. And so I thought, okay. So I followed after my brothers. And they were so upset that it upset me. And I started crying. And by the time we got back to where my sister was, she heard us crying, so she started crying. And then my mom said something happened. And at that point, the crickets quit making noise, the birds stopped chirping, and it got dead silent. And she said the hair raised up off the back of her neck. And she felt like something creepy was going on. And she had 4 crying children. And my brothers were trying to tell my dad they saw these creatures. And Dad said, no, you saw a bear. And about that time, a deer came running down the game trail out of the forested area like its tail was on fire. And Dad said, see, the bear scared a deer. And Shannon and Sheldon said, no, it's not bears. They're not bears. And I said, no, I saw something too, Dad, not a bear. And we were just hysterical. We knew we had not seen bears. And Dad kept telling us, no, you saw a bear. And Mom says, I don't care what they saw. Something's wrong. It's now dead silent. Now Kimberly's creeped out. I'm creeped out. Let's get the heck out of here. So they packed up a lunch and we left. 3 days later, on the TV news, on the local news and in the newspaper, there was a report that hunters and the workers, the Corps of Engineer workers, found these huge footprints, and somebody had a sighting of this creature known to be Bigfoot. And they showed a drawing on the TV set. All 3 of us, my brothers and myself, pointed to the TV screen and said, that's what we saw. That's what we saw. And that's when we realized we'd seen a Bigfoot. And our parents were just stupefied. And my mom never believed us, but my dad, who has a really good friend, owns a Bigfoot museum to this today. Just recently, he went to that museum, and now my dad's convinced that that's what we really did see, and now he believes us. And my dad agreed that I should go ahead and talk to you and tell you about our experiences, because he now believes that we not only entertained a Bigfoot in the rainforest, but that we did see that when we were children. And he's just fascinated that that happened, and he feels bad he never believed us when we were kids, because it caused my brothers to just clam up and not talk. And they couldn't talk about it for 40 years. And my one brother became a Bigfoot aficionado, has Bigfoot foot slippers, has books about Bigfoot, and became obsessed with Bigfoot. And the other one developed PTSD over it.
Yeah, that's incredible and scary at the same time. And I can see how this really affected your family. And you guys were certain that what you saw was no bear, and it was absolutely one of these Sasquatch creatures. And it's good that your dad ended up believing you guys and that the news validated these creatures were in the area. Someone found huge prints and a person had a Bigfoot sighting. But yeah, it's unfortunate that one of your brothers got PTSD from this encounter, and I can see how that can happen for sure. One person will be obsessed with the encounter and they want to go out there looking for these creatures, and the next person, is terrified and they never want to go back into the woods again.
Yeah, that's what happened.
Yeah. Okay. Before we talk about these two encounters, do you want to continue on with your experiences and anything else that you've had happen in your life?
Well, it's interesting to note that I know you've discussed paranormal with some of the other people you've interviewed, and it's interesting. I've thought about this about our family, and my brother Sheldon is very attracted to animals. When animals are attracted to him, he has actually seen an angel in his lifetime, and I've seen an angel too during a high period of stress when I lost my apartment, lost my job, and I wound up having to move back home as an adult in my 30s to my parents' house. And I was sleeping on a mattress on the floor in what they call their library one night, and I was just having a really rough time. And I woke up, and when I woke up, there was this angel floating above me. And I remember acknowledging it in my sleep, saying, "Oh, an angel." And I was just so tired, but I was just filled with this sudden feeling of peace, and I went back to sleep. Hours later, I woke up and realized, oh my gosh, I saw an angel. I saw an angel, and I remember talking to my pastor about it and my deaconess about it, and they said, yes, that's totally possible that you did see an angel because they do show themselves in times when you need to see them. And it just further cemented the reality to me that God is real and that angels are real. And when my brother experienced this, he too was having a high time of stress and experiencing a demonic attack at his job where the owner insisted it was her dead father moving things around the employment where he worked, and he'd find things moved around while he was working at night. Garbage cans would move themselves across the floor by themselves. He would find the coffee pot would move itself from the counter into the sink, and he was by himself. And he'd find cups he'd put up in the shelf. They'd suddenly now be back down on the table. He was experiencing things like that, and he finally brought his Bible to work and prayed against it, and then it stopped, and then he saw an angel. So he felt that God was finally protecting him against whatever was doing this crazy stuff at work. And whatever was doing that disappeared. And I actually got a phone call from this woman saying that her father had disappeared, and she blamed my brother for disturbing her father. And it finally came down to, well, excuse me, but you know what? My brother doesn't have to put up with that kind of paranormal activity, and I think it's best he doesn't work for you anymore. And he actually left that employer. But I just thought that was insane kind of stuff to put up with, to have stuff move around behind you. And he actually got smacked in the head with something, too, that was flying across the room. And that was my brother Sheldon. And he told me it was a really wild experience. And he worked at the airport for a while, and sometimes he would see groups of people walking toward him, and one of these figures slapped him on the face one time at work, and then he started praying against that, and then it finally stopped. And I don't know why he's sensitive to that stuff, but apparently he is, and he can see angels, and he can see demonic figures, and he prays away the demonic figures, and they go away. But he's able to see that stuff, and he's experienced that off and on throughout his life. And he tells me every once in a while he experiences that. So he goes many times a week to this place. It's run by the Roman Catholic Church, and it's a grotto that they have. that's a garden, and he goes there several times a week to pray and to meditate because he gets disturbed by these things that he sees. And that's his routine, so that he can fight back against these things. And that's what he does. And he's the one that's the Bigfoot aficionado that really wants to know more about these creatures, why they exist, and what they are. And he's curious about them. And he believes that they're a real physical creature. And he believes that they're one of God's creatures and that they should be left alone. And I do too. And as far as my paranormal experiences, I've experienced a person that walked into my bedroom one night from the sidewalk into my room and stood next to my bed. He was dressed as a cowboy in a cowboy hat, shirt, and pants. And I didn't know what he was or what he wanted. But in the name of Jesus Christ, I banished him from my room. And he left. And then I saw him again outside, and I banished him again from the property. And then people later said that the ghost of the property had disappeared. And they described it, and it was the same thing that I had banished in the name of Jesus. So these things, as far as I understand them from my Bible, are not ghosts. They're actually demons masquerading around as dead people. And Christians are allowed to banish them, so I've done that. So I don't know why I've seen these things. I just have. But I think probably the greatest paranormal experience I've ever had is one where I could have died, and I was riding in a car on Columbia River Highway, and two cars came around a curve with less than a car length between us. And there was a red car and a red car with a white stripe, racing stripe going down the top of the car and across the hood on my side. And there was nowhere to go, either a steep embankment or the mountainside. And I looked at my friend and I said, this is it. We're going to die. They were going about 70 miles an hour. We were traveling 50. And I just closed my eyes and waited to die. And there was a snap and a sizzle sound in the air and a smell of sulfur. And I opened my eyes, and the car that was on my side, on the passenger side, was suddenly all the way over on the driver's side, and the red car was still about on the quarter panel of my friend's on the driver's side. And we don't know how that car was magically somehow on the driver's side now ahead of the other car. It was like something lifted it up and moved it. And we were traveling now at that point at 3 miles an hour because my friend had slammed on the brakes, and she was like in a trance. It's like her eyes were open. She was in a trance. She couldn't respond, but the car kept moving. We traveled on to Crown Point, which is this beautiful lookout over the gorge between Washington State and Oregon. And I got out of the car, and what pulled up beside us was two black SUVs with really high wheels, so they could see over the top of our vehicle and beyond, and a monster truck behind that. It was an SUV and a monster truck. And these teens poured out, and she had wet her pants, so she got clothes out of the back the trunk. She had extra clothes and went into the bathroom at Crown Point to change. And these kids got out and they said, oh my gosh, did you see the white hand? Did you see the white hand that picked up the car and moved it? We saw this big white hand come down out of the forest, out of the sky, pick up this car, and they moved it beside your car. Did you see it? And they were all talking over each other, talking about this big white hand that came down and picked up this car. 9 of them, 9 teens. And I said, no, I had my eyes closed. I said, did you smell the sulfur? I said, I smelled the sulfur and heard the zap and the sizzle. And they said, yeah, it was a really loud snapping sound. And we all talked about this in the parking lot. And this one guy, his dad was a pastor, and he said, my old man's been telling me about God for years, and I didn't believe him. Now, he says, I believe that was the hand of God. That was the hand of God or the hand of an angel, something. And right there in the parking lot, they wanted to know if anybody had a Bible. And I had my Bible, and we had like a mini revival right there in the parking lot, man. And these teenagers were believing in Jesus Christ. We were going through verses. And then they all decided they wanted to go to this kid's church and get baptized. And that was an enormous experience. And I've never forgotten it, because I would have died had this car just smacked at 70 miles an hour right into the car in front of me. And he just would have smacked and we would have died. There was just no other way around it. And so God saved my life. And these kids were witness to that. They saw this white hand. And the way they described it was just, I mean, I wish I'd have had my eyes open, but I was too chicken. I was just praying I wouldn't feel the pain of being killed. And so that's probably one of the greatest things I've ever experienced. And I've just never forgotten it. And that was back in 1987. It was August. It was about the last week of August. And it was a bright, sunny day. And I just remember that clear as a bell. And I don't know if all these experiences are related. I have no idea. But I just know I've experienced them, and it's amazing. It's just amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank God that he saved you guys and reached out and saved the car full of teenagers, and that you guys weren't injured. I definitely believe that. And the fact that you described that sound and the smell, that definitely sounds like something supernatural, and it's a miracle that you're still here today.
Yeah, because we would have been hit. It would have hit those teens, and it would have been a chain reaction. So it would have been a major, major accident on the highway. It would have been just major. And I don't know what happened to the other cars, if they recognized what happened or what. I never saw those two drivers that were racing each other. So to this day, I don't know what happened to them, what they believed. I don't know if they realized what happened to them. I don't know. But I know that these teenagers knew, and it was something.
Yeah, for sure. And you often hear people say, I have no evidence that God exists. You know, a lot of people just believe it because they read something that someone else wrote thousands of years ago. There's no evidence that he exists. But for the people that have an experience like this, like, how can you not believe in God? I think a lot of people out there in the world have had supernatural, paranormal experiences, or they have seen Sasquatch. And how can you not believe in God when you see something that shouldn't exist, that defies logic, science, and everything that you know?
Yeah, and I just believe that Sasquatch, Bigfoot, is a creature that God created, that just it exists, and it's part of his creation. I don't know why it exists. I don't know if it pre-existed the flood. When I read the Bible, the flood pretty much states it killed everything except for the marine life, and that God gathered the animals for Noah 2 by 2, except for the clean animals. There were 7. And that then everything, came off the ark there on Ararat, and that then everything after its own kind reproduced. And if somewhere in the DNA line of primates out emerged this Sasquatch, which I believe is totally possible, and I think the reason we may have not discovered it until recently, although it's been in existence since the Native Americans, they talk about it, and there's the Yeti, and I believe this creature is everywhere, that there's landmass where it can exist. I just think the reason people didn't start really modern man is because we haven't pushed back into the forest like we have. And now we're living in its environment, and now we're having contact with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's very possible that the Sasquatch were on the ark, or perhaps people mention like the orbs and other dimensions. Maybe they went somewhere else. And it's too
Yeah,
hard for me to speculate, but I definitely agree that God created everything, even, Satan, his angels, demons. I mean, I don't
yeah.
know if he directly created it, but he is the author of everything and he allowed it to happen for a reason.
Well, yeah, Lucifer was created as a beautiful cherub on God's mountain, and Lucifer rebelled. And once he was tossed down to the earth, then he became Satan.
Yeah. A
So
lot of people say that Lucifer is different than Satan, but I think it's the same thing. I'm not really
it's the
sure.
same thing.
Hmm.
Yeah, if I've read the Bible cover to cover many times and been studying it since I was 10. And like I said, I'm 62 now. And I made a hobby out of studying Genesis and creation science because I had a teacher when I was in fifth grade challenge me on evolution. And so I decided to study everything I could on evolution, including reading Darwin's theory. I've actually got the leather-bound book on Darwin's theory, and I've read that several times, and I've read Genesis over and over and studied every aspect of hydrology, different factions of science, um, on creationism and evolution. And there's more evidence for creation science than there is evolution. Evolution is really a theory. It's not, you can't really prove it. You can prove micro evolution, which is what creationism is, but you can't prove macro evolution, which is a fish turning into a mammal. You can't really prove that, but yet they make statements like that. Like they'll say, the reason we have mammals is because whales got too close to shore and grew limbs. That's why once in a while you'll see a hind leg on a whale. Well, I've been to the beach for years, Miguel, and I've never seen a whale with a hind leg, okay? It just doesn't make sense to me.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree. I think
So,
even in Darwin's book, towards the end, he says that none of this is actual proof and it's all
mhm.
speculation. But I think science used it as actual proof to try to change the narrative.
And even Darwin himself, I've read biographies on Darwin. He actually asked his children to honor his wife's religion and to pray. So he wasn't a total non-believer in God. He just wanted to prove his theory. And even he didn't know if he could prove his theory. And it does say that in his book, that someday science will become advanced enough to prove or disprove him, that he couldn't prove his theory.
Yeah, for sure. And
So,
I mean, it can go
yeah.
two ways.
So,
Like when you study the universe or the oceans or other land masses, I think it can push you towards believing in God. Like, wow, look at all this. As you're studying it, it just blows your mind. But other people go a different direction where they say, oh, there's got to be a reason why all this is here and we can recreate it. And I don't know. I feel like a lot of what I studied pushed me towards God. Like, wow, look how many stars are up there. Look how infinite the universe is. But another person can see that and say, there's an answer, a mathematical answer to all this, and it's all random.
yeah, you have to have all the amino acids present to create DNA. They can't just crawl out of primordial soup. The mathematical, I studied math in college, and the mathematical probabilities of that happening, uh, you can take a watch and break it into pieces, put it in a paper bag, and shake it up. And the mathematical probabilities of that watch coming out in one piece, the mathematical probabilities are greater for that watch to come out in one piece than it is for all the amino acids to come in line to form DNA. And when you think about that, because there's no way that watch is going to come out of a paper bag after you shake it up and come out in one piece, then you realize the idea of DNA just coming out in one piece to form life is not going to happen when you think about that.
Yeah, I agree.
If the
And
mathematical, yeah,
well,
if they say the mathematical probabilities of the watch coming out are greater than the DNA coming out and forming on its own.
yeah, for sure. A
So
lot of
when you,
what science talks about with the Big Bang just honestly sounds like what the Bible describes in Genesis when God said, "Let there be light." I mean, it's
yeah,
pretty much the same thing, just told in a different fashion.
So anyway, it's just all these experiences have convinced me that God is very real. There's a very real spiritual world. There's a very real physical world. And you have to decide in your life which side are you going to stand on. Are you going to stand on the God's light, or are you going to stand on the other light? And if you stand on the other light, you're going to be in trouble, and you're going to be exposed to a lot of dark things. If you stand on God's light, then your life is full of peace and hope. And that's the decision we have to make every day, is what side we're going to stand on. And I make the decision every day to stand on God's side.
Yeah.
And then I just hope for the best. And then we have these experiences. And hopefully God is with us and walking with us, protecting us. And I just praise the Lord that when we had these experiences with Bigfoot, we were never harmed. We were never harmed when we were in the rainforest. We didn't know what we were dealing with. And yet we were never hurt. We admired all the things we saw. We thought they were amazing. We didn't mess with them. We didn't touch them. We obviously were communicating with something that we didn't know who we were communicating with. We left food for it. It was thankful for the food, and we just went about our business because, and it must have sensed, listening to other people talk about Bigfoot being compassionate. I think now, as an adult looking back, that it may have recognized or felt that we were hurt children, and that we were looking for a place of just solitude and peacefulness. And I think it let us alone.
Yeah, it does sound like it. And I feel like these creatures have an ability to sense individuals and what they're going through, and possibly like their aura, their energy, or if they have like a disability.
So I think that they, I think whatever that was up there, sensed that and probably appreciated the fact we left something for it. We didn't know we were doing that. We were ignorant, but we left something for it, and it was gratified by that. We communicated with it, and then we didn't mess with its structures or mess with its bed. We respected that because we were taught to respect things and respect the area that you're in, and I guess it receives that. So, we were perfectly safe up there. We never had a bad experience. And we took our parents. What's interesting, and I forgot to mention this, is our parents wanted to go up there one time with us, so they did, and my dad brought the dog. Now, the dog flipped out and would not walk. It was a dachshund. And my dad had to carry it up the side of the hill to get it up there. And Fritz would not walk. He was scared. He peed all over himself and laid on his back and just would not walk. My dad had to carry him. And my dad couldn't figure out what he was afraid of. And now I wonder if he sensed the Bigfoot up there.
Oh, yeah, without a doubt. These animals are able to pick up on other creatures in the forest way better than we are. So that dog knew immediately that something was following you guys in the woods. Something was nearby. And they can smell really good and a lot better than a human being. I've noticed here in Missouri, like when there's a bunch of turkeys around, the deer will hang out with them. And the turkeys have really good eyesight. But also, when the turkeys are out in the woods, they can't smell as good as the deer. So when the deer pick up someone's scent, they'll make this like this snort wheeze sound, or like they'll blow is what they call it, and it alerts all the other deer. So I think that helps the turkeys. And yeah, animals just have amazing senses.
Yeah, every time my dad and my mom came up a couple different times with us, and every time they brought the dog, that was his reaction. Every time.
Yeah.
And my mom noticed how quiet it was, and it kind of raised the hair on the back of her neck, so she didn't like to come up to that area. But my dad was curious and wanted to come up and see the ships, bring the binocular, and look at the ocean and see the ships. And he remarked how quiet it was, and he didn't touch any of the stuff up there either. But we did a whoop whoop and a knock knock, and he was shocked at what answered back. And he was amused by that, but he thought it was a homeless camper.
Yeah.
And
You guys were interacting with Sasquatch the whole time and didn't know it.
yeah, I believe so. Now that we're adults and older, and so anyway, yeah, that just amazes me. I mean, we didn't realize this when we were children, and I saw my first Bigfoot documentary when I was 35, and I just looked at that, and the hair raised in the back of my neck. I called my brothers, and they said, "Oh my gosh!" They turned it on the TV, and they said, "I've seen this before." And Shannon said, "I've seen this before." I said, "Where? Where do you think we saw it?" "At the beach." And it just shocked us. It just shocked us all. Anyway. Fast forward, I went to that same area here in 2019 to go visit that same camp area. And that rainforest area is gone. It's been wiped out by a landslide, and it's no longer there. I was so shocked. The camp area is totally different. The rainforest area has been wiped out. So whatever was there is probably not there. Bigfoot's probably not there now, because I think that was a special area where it hung out. And I was so shocked to see how different and everything has changed, and the forest has been thinned out, and it just shocked me. I was hoping that it was still there and intact, and it's just gone. And they've totally done some different construction, and I thought, oh my gosh. And there wasn't a forest ranger to be found.
Yeah.
So
I think
really
that's why the restriction signs were in the area and why there were forest rangers walking around, especially at nighttime. That's unusual. It's like they were looking for something or protecting something.
That's what I think, because we've never seen that ever other than there. And it was like that for the entire time over the years that we went camping there, always. And even at night, there was patrols. We'd run into them when we went to use they had flush toilets there, and we would go up the trail to the flush toilets, and I'd run into one of them. And they'd always be in pairs or in threes. And I thought, why? We've never had that at Fort Stevens, but always there they did.
Did you notice if they had any equipment on them, anything unusual?
The only thing I noticed is they always had their shovels and stuff, but it seemed like they had in their cart something under a blanket. And I think it was a rifle. My dad won't swear to it, but I think they were hiding a rifle.
Yeah, for sure. And these nests that you found in the area, can you describe them, these structures?
Yeah, they were there was a lot of twisted trees that were bent over, like they looked like hoops, and then there'd be lots of them like that in one area, but it wasn't like the tree was bent over. It was like it was like several trees were ripped out, and you could see the roots sticking up in the air slightly, and they were bent and interwoven, almost like baskets, but they were woven structures, and it looked, I don't know how to describe it. Sheldon said it looked like woven tree rainbows. They were woven like that, and then there were X's, and they'd be several, the trees were probably about 3 to 4 inches in diameter, and there'd be 3 or 4 of those with the roots at the end. You could see them, and they'd be made into X's. And then there'd be A-frame type structures, and again the same thing. You'd see probably half a dozen of those collected together, and again you'd see a few of them with the root structures hanging out on the end. So it wasn't just, at first I thought, well, the wind blew these things together, but it wasn't trees that were still in the ground like that. They'd been actually taken out of the ground. And when you're a kid, when we were kids, we just thought somebody did this on purpose, like artwork, but we weren't thinking some creature did it. We couldn't figure out how it was done, but we just thought, oh, great, artwork. And when we saw the documentary, we realized, oh my gosh, a Bigfoot did this. And my parents noticed this stuff too, and they said, this is kind of unique. But we didn't touch it. I mean, we just looked at it and thought, wow, this is really, weird. I think things that we thought were the most interesting were the saplings that were, and I haven't seen this on a Bigfoot documentary, but I remember it. They were interwoven together almost like a basket handle and curved. There were two like that. And I don't know how a human being could do that. They were giant size.
Yeah.
I've never seen that.
It almost makes you wonder if that was like breeding grounds for the Sasquatch, and those are like nests for the little ones, and where the whole clans were hanging out at.
It's interesting. And there were lots of these big grass nests. And my dad saw them and said, oh, that's for the deer. Don't ever mess with those. The deer are sleeping in those. And I thought, what? Really? I mean, it looks like it's 5 times bigger than a deer.
Yeah, so where you guys left the sack lunches, they would take it and leave fossils, shells, and twisted sticks. Can you describe the twisted sticks?
The twisted sticks were like, they'd be like, 1 or 2, maybe 2 millimeters in round, and then they'd be about the length of my hand, which my hand's about 5 inches, I guess, in length, 6 inches. Anyway, they'd twist those around, and they'd be 3 or 4 of those interwoven around. Anyway, my brothers took those. I was interested in the fossilized rocks. I still have one of them, and it's a seashell inside a rock. And I was fascinated by those. And then there's a time when they actually left a rusty coin and some rusty bottle caps.
Yeah, that is really interesting.
The twigs, though, that were woven it looked like braided hair, but it was actually thick, 2 or 3 centimeters in width, and then the length was about 5, 6 inches, and those would be woven together. And I thought those were interesting. I don't know what those were used for. I don't know if that, I wonder if those were play toys for baby Bigfoot or something. I don't know, but those would be left there too.
Yeah, it could be as simple as toys, or possibly they're trying to tell you something and communicate with you, or both. But I've seen that before in Oregon with researchers, and it almost reminded me of like the crown of thorns that was placed on Jesus' head. I'm not comparing it to it, but it just reminded me of that, like how woven it was and circular. You could definitely tell that it wasn't a natural occurrence.
Yeah, it was something that somebody made. And so we just assumed that this guy was an artist, this camper was an artist, and he appreciated what we left him. My mom even got to the point of putting apples in with the peanut butter jelly sandwiches. So, there was apples and peanut butter jelly sandwiches, and that's why I was leaving comments about leaving sandwiches, because this thing, he loved peanut butter jelly sandwiches. So, anyway.
Yeah, I've noticed they like peanut butter, so I'll try the peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Maybe that'll work.
So anyway, really loved the peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. So that's when we left it, and really liked the peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Man. So we made it happy.
Yeah, absolutely. It's terrifying that your brother was running down that game trail and he tripped and did a face plant onto a female Bigfoot. It doesn't sound it doesn't sound like this thing was out to hurt him. Like, it was just as surprised as he was.
He now that he's 60, he actually can laugh about it a little bit because he's had a lot of counseling. And he said to me the other day, actually it was like 2 weeks ago, he talked about it a little bit, and he said, who in the hell is a kid? I'm 9 years old, and I do a face plant into a female. I said, well, how did you know it was a female? He said, it had breasts. He said, my face was in its breast, Michelle, in her chest. And he says, my legs are kicking in the air. And he says, I'm trying to picture that now. And he says, it's like a cartoon. He says, what the hell? He says, I'm got my feet in the air and I'm thinking I can't get anywhere. My arms are flailing. And he said, what am I doing? And then he said, then this thing lifts me up in the air and looks at me. And he said, she wasn't mad. And he said, for the first time, he used the word, she had kind eyes.
Yeah, I noticed that with the juvenile I encountered. It had kind eyes. It was, I don't know, you could tell it wasn't evil, but that's just my perception of the encounter.
I said, how do you know that? He said, just the way she looked at me. He said, kind eyes. And he said, it looked to me like she was trying to smile at me. And the ch sound, he said, in my mind, I think she was trying to chuckle. It's like she thought it was funny what happened. But he remembers the stink. He said she really did smell. So, but he said he was just, at first, he said he was just terrified. What? You know, what was happening? He said it just froze him. He said it was several minutes of her studying him.
Why do you think the creature picked him up?
Well, he was face planted into her, and he was kicking his feet in the air. So she just gently picked him up and held him up in the air to look at him. I think she just wanted to look at him.
Yeah, I think so too. The Sasquatch creature was studying Sheldon, and you often hear that if you run into one of these creatures, they'll kill you. But I mean, this thing could have snapped him in half, and it didn't.
No, I mean, she just studied Shannon like, what are you? And Shannon said she just looked at him really good, just looked at him, and he looked at her, and then she just gently set him back down on the ground, just really gently. She didn't slam him down on the ground. She just gently, slowly, and it was really slow, set him on the ground. She said everything was like in slow motion. Just slowly set him on the ground.
Yeah, that's interesting. I often wonder why there's good clans of Sasquatch and why there are bad ones. And it reminds me of the Native Americans. Like, there were good tribes and there were evil tribes, and they were at war with each other. It makes me wonder if it's the same thing with these Sasquatch creatures, because you hear encounters like what you and your family had, and I've heard that over and over, and then you hear other stories. Even the Native Americans will say it, that these things will eat you.
Yeah, that's the thing I can't quite figure out, because I hear people talk about how they were attacked and stuff, and I can't understand, what did you do? It's like, my first reaction is, what did you do? Did you do something to them first? I mean, did you offend them somehow? I don't understand. And then I'm just wondering, have these Sasquatch had bad interactions with humans so that their dander is up? I don't understand. Because our encounters were not that way. Our encounters were peaceful. They were positive. I mean, we clearly entered into their territory, but we didn't have that kind of reaction. So yeah. I don't understand. But then we were children too. We were children, and we were emotionally damaged and hurt children too. So if these things are intuitive, they sense that, and we weren't really wild children. We didn't come in screaming and yelling and hollering and making a lot of noise. We were like dead, silent, quiet children. And so I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. And I feel like they study certain people and only interact with certain people. But at the same time, like, you and I and everyone listening, we've all ran into bad humans. And, you're really mindful of that in the future after you have an interaction like that. And you don't want it to happen again. It's like, who's good and who's bad? And you're constantly thinking about that. And I'm sure these creatures do the same thing.
I'm sure that they do. So, and I can't help but wonder if they're disturbed by loud noises and loud sounds. And before we were talking here, I was watching one of your programs, and it's about this fella building a garage out in an area that he bought that's in the forest, and he's banging on his garage he's building, and suddenly he hears these two trees, go slam bang. And I'm thinking the Sasquatch is trying to communicate to him that, hey, you're disturbing me. So now I'm going to slam these two trees down to communicate with you that you're bothering me. And I think that they try to communicate when they're unhappy. And I think that they make contact with people on purpose when there's something disturbing them. And we just don't pick up on the cues. And I think they become more aggressive, maybe, when their signs or sounds or their communication is not understood clearly. So then they get a little bit more pushy, maybe. It's just my guess from all the different programs I've watched. I've watched dozens of your programs now and listened to people talk about their experiences. And I can't help but wondering if we're just too noisy.
Yeah, it very well could be. And Sheldon, he ran into the first creature, and it was taken, a number 2. And then the second one, he said it was peeing, possibly on a tree.
Yeah. Sheldon, he ran into the one that was peeing on the tree. And, now he's mentally challenged, so he wasn't scared right away. He just, was incensed that this hairy, naked man. And see, now his was, I asked Sheldon how tall was the hairy, naked man, and he said about 5 foot. So I figure this was Junior.
Yeah, it does sound like it. And after he figured out this thing wasn't human, he took off running. Is that correct?
Oh, yeah. He took off running, and he realized, oh, you're not human. I don't know what you are, but you're not human. I'm getting out of here. And that was after Shannon had run by, after he had his encounter with the female, which I think was the mom of the group. I think she was mom. And he's running by, and then after he's terrified, Sheldon realizes, okay, you're not human. I got to get out of here too. Meanwhile, I think I'm confronting the dad, because I think Dad was about 8 foot tall, 8 or 9 feet.
Oh, wow. So you guys all saw a different family member from the Sasquatch clan.
Yeah, I think we did. I think we encountered what I now understand is called a pod. And it was a family group.
Yeah. And it didn't look like a gorilla, but it did look primate. It looked human. I think primates look like humans, so.
Yeah, it was primate. It was not a gorilla. We went to the zoo as kids, and we'd seen a gorilla, we'd seen monkeys, we'd seen bears, and it was not a bear. For one thing, the ears are on top of the head, and it didn't have ears on top of its head. It was not a monkey. It wasn't a chimpanzee. It didn't have a tail, okay? It wasn't a, monkeys have tails, chimpanzees don't. I think that's right. And it didn't have the right kind of head for a monkey or a chimpanzee. It had a round head like a human. It was just a bigger head. And also, chimps and monkeys have necks. This thing didn't really have a neck that I could see.
Yeah, I'm sure that was a terrifying encounter, especially when all 3 of you were crying and your parents were probably really confused and alarmed themselves, but they probably didn't want to say and, scare you guys even more.
Yeah, and they just kept trying to influence us to think that it was a bear, and no. And then when the deer comes running out scared, like its tail's on fire, is how my dad described it. He said, "See, told you, a bear scared it." And no. No. Afraid not. But they were really astonished when we pointed to the TV screen at this drawing of a Bigfoot. And we all pointed to it at the same time and said, "That's it. That's what we saw." And Shannon said his had he said it had boobs on it. And Sheldon said mine was shorter. And I said mine was like that. And so anyway, they just couldn't get over that. They just thought, holy cow.
Yeah.
They didn't know what to do with that information.
Yeah. Well, that confirms it. And I'm sure whenever it got eerily quiet, there was like a strange feeling in the air. I noticed that when these things were around here, like everything would just get dead quiet and you just felt like you were being watched, like something wasn't right.
That's what my mom felt. She said it was like somebody's here. I don't know who, but it's getting weird. It's getting creepy. Let's just go.
Yeah. Then for sure that something's off when the hairs on your arms and on the back of your neck start rising up like there's electricity on you. Like there's definitely something not right.
That's what she said she felt. And she passed away in 2018, so I can't talk to her about it anymore. But I asked her about that, was it 2010 after I saw a special on this. And she said that's what she felt. So that's why we left.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Well, let's move on to the angel that you saw when you were in your bedroom. What did it look like? And was it like in a dream state or were you fully awake?
I woke up briefly after being having a nightmare, and I woke up and I rolled over and this thing was floating above me. It was white with flowing robes. It didn't have wings. It had flowing robes. And in my mind, I rolled over and said, "Oh, it's an angel. Look at that." And I was very tired. I don't know if I was fully awake, but I recognized it to be an angel. And it was glowing white, and it was floating in the air. And there was no wind in my bedroom, but I noticed that the garment that it was wearing were rippling as if there was wind in the air. That's the thing I remember the most, was the garments were rippling as if there was wind blowing, but yet there was no wind in the bedroom. But these garments were rippling and flowing white robes. And I noticed his face was very kind face, and seemed to be full of concern, and was smiling and had golden eyes. And I felt immediately at peace. Just a feeling of warmth came over me, of just instantaneous peace and love. And I felt comforted as if I'd received the warmest hug I'd ever received in my life. And I just felt like I'm so safe now. I can go back to sleep and know that I'm taken care of. Those were the feelings that went through me. And I just thought, I'm okay now. I'm okay. It's okay I'm unemployed. It's okay that I'm sleeping on the floor here. It's okay. Everything's going to work out. And I just felt like this heavenly peace. And I just rolled over and went back to sleep. And I slept probably another 5 hours. And I woke up totally refreshed. And the first thing on my mind was, oh my gosh, I saw an angel. And I know everything's going to be okay. And it was not long after that experience, I found a job, and I was financially back on my feet, and I managed to get moved out into an apartment and back on my own again.
Yeah, that's an incredible testimony, and I believe it was an angel because the feeling that you got of peace and love, and that does sound like an angel. You didn't feel this feeling of like hate, fear, and worry.
Mm-mm, not at all.
Yeah, that's
Not at all.
incredible.
And like I said, I spoke to my pastor and my deaconess about it, and they assured me that that's definitely an angelic presence.
Yeah, it does sound like it. What other experiences have you had that maybe you didn't think of at the moment? Have you had any more with Bigfoot? Anywhere else? Anything else that you can think of? Any other paranormal experiences? Any like visitations
There
from
was
aliens? Anything like that?
there was one other experience out in Ames, Oregon, when a friend of mine from work invited me to come out to her parents' house out in Ames. It was really hot. We were going to sleep on the balcony, and their house sat out in a country area, and there was forest about, I can't figure out the distance, but there was forestry, that there was a heavy forested area. There's a lot of forest out there. And that was on the back side of their property. And I said, sure, okay. And she laughed and said it was rumored that there was Bigfoot in the forest. I said, well, that would be funny if he came out and, we had a demonstration of Bigfoot out in the backyard. And she said, don't laugh about that. She says, that's not very funny because people have seen him. And I said, okay. So we went to sleep, and it was pitch black out there. And I remember hearing a weird noise. It woke me up, and I rolled over my sleeping bag on the cot I was sleeping on. And I remember the moon was out. It was a full moon. And I saw this eye shine in the forest. And it started out as kind of an orangey, red, yellowish kind of, I'm trying to remember here. It was like greenish and then more orangey, red kind of eye shine. But except the eyes were too big to be an owl. I mean, it was that the forest was far enough away that if I would be seeing eye shine, it'd be really tiny. But this looked like flashlights staring at me. And I was like, good grief, what the hell is that? I couldn't figure out why these eyes were so big. And they were high up off the ground, so it wasn't a coyote, and it wasn't a wolf. And I thought, what the heck are you? It must have been 8 to 9 feet off the ground, and it wasn't in the trees. And they didn't move really, as far as there was a blink once in a while, but they were just steady. And I thought, what are you? And then this weird noise again, like nothing I've ever heard. I don't know if I can replicate it. It wasn't a whoop whoop, and there was no wood knocking, but there was just this kind of a funny kind of a yowl or howl, like something in pain. And it just gave me the chills. And I looked at that and I thought, what the heck? And the next thing, her dad is standing. We were on the upstairs floor, and her dad is standing there pulling the drapes back, and he's got his hand over his lips, his finger over his lips, and he's got a shotgun. And he's whispering to me, come on, get in the house right now. And he woke up my friend, he woke her up, his daughter, and said, get in the house right now. And he shut the door and locked it and pulled the drapes. And he's going all through the house, making sure the lights are out and the drapes are pulled, and he's telling us to be really quiet and go to the main bedroom and go to bed. And I said, what's going on? He said, just be quiet, don't make any noise, keep the lights out, and that's it, and we'll talk about it in the morning. And morning came, and I said, what was the big deal? And he says, well, don't you know what that was? And I said, I have no clue. I said, what are you talking about? That's a Bigfoot. And he said, if you make any racket or any noise, you'll attract it to the house. I said, what? He says, yeah. He says, the neighbor made the mistake the last time that thing was like that in the woods with the full moon, and it was yowling like that. He made the mistake of turning all the lights on in the house, and the darn thing came out of the forest and punched out his back window. I said, you got to be kidding me. Punched out the back window of his house, and he reached in and was grabbing stuff. I said, oh, not a nice Bigfoot. So that was the only time we talked about Bigfoot at his house. So he said, when we see that thing or hear it, and we see the eye shine, he said, we turn all the lights out, pull all the drapes, and everybody is quiet. We don't want to attract it to the house. I said, when are you guys moving? He says, we're moving next month. I said, I see. He said, that thing is going to punch our windows out. He said, I'm not going to be here when it does. And that's the only other thing I can recall of having experience. And that's the only negative thing I can recall, because I don't know why it would want to do that. I don't know if it doesn't like the noise that was going on around the area or what. And I finally, I said, what do you guys do to make it mad? And he says, I don't know. I said, I run my lawnmower a lot, and I chainsaw when I chop stuff down, and so the only thing I could figure is it didn't like the unfriendly noises that they were making, and it was making it mad. So I almost forgot about that experience. I'm glad you reminded me.
Yeah, the eye shine does sound like Bigfoot, and they confirmed it, so that's most likely what it was.
So anyway, that was their neighborhood or local Bigfoot there in that area. And that's also the area where my dad's friend has a Bigfoot museum where he's collected casts and hair and people's photographs and that kind of stuff. He's actually got a little museum out there. And my dad's been to visit, and he saw the evidence and was convinced that not only does this thing exist, but they actually have one out there somewhere living. So then that shocked my dad.
Yeah, that's incredible, and that validates their existence. They're here, they're all over the planet, and people are running into these creatures. Do you have any questions for me before we wrap up the podcast?
I don't think so. I just think that there's different species that live in different areas of the United States, and I think they have different temperaments.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think these creatures are?
I believe that they are ancient creatures that developed after the Ark settled on Mount Ararat and things spread out. I think they're natural descendants of primates, and I believe that they're a special group of primates, and that because our DNA has been so corrupted by the cursed earth, that they are just a different type of creature. And I think they're misunderstood. And I don't know if they're tied to the supernatural or not. I can't answer that. Only God would know that answer. But I think that it's a good idea for mankind to not hunt them, to not deliberately provoke them. And I think it's okay to try and research them, to learn more about them, but to treat them kindly and respect the area in which they live and try not to provoke them.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So I really do.
Yeah, that's an excellent theory, and it very well could be possible. Okay. Well, Michelle, you did an excellent job today at describing these encounters that you and your family had, and it was quite a bit. I mean, there's a lot going on there. It makes me wonder if there's some type of connection. And you even mentioned it earlier that these things are possibly attracted to certain individuals, and I think that may be the case.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I really enjoyed being able to talk to someone else who has experienced these things, has seen these things as a researcher, because nobody other than outside my family has had these experiences. And when I talk about it, they look at me like I'm crazy. And so for the first time in my life, I feel like, I'm validated. And it just feels so good to be able to talk to somebody else who's experienced this kind of stuff. And I want to thank you so much, very, very much, for this opportunity. I really appreciate it, Miguel. Really, I do. And God bless you for what you do and how you help people and allow people to share their stories. I think it's a wonderful thing that you're doing. It's really great.
Well, I appreciate that, Michelle, and thank you very much for telling your encounters here on Sasquatch Theory, for your kindness, and for everything you did for me today.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Okay. Well, I'll let you go for now, and I hope you have a good day. And if you need anything else, or if you encounter anything else in the future, definitely feel free to reach out to me, and I appreciate you.
Okay, thank you. You too.
All right. Thank you, and God bless. Bye. All right, Michelle, thank you again for sharing your Bigfoot encounters and experiences with me here on Sasquatch Theory, and you did an excellent job at describing these encounters. And I am sure that terrified you and your other siblings because you guys didn't know what it was. You didn't know what you were interacting with at the time. And that is very interesting because that's how it all begins. And people start having these experiences and they just can't put their finger on it. They know that something's there, something's watching them, and eventually they find out what it is. That's certainly how it unfolded for me, and it definitely gives you the creep factor, like somebody is watching you. You can tell that something's just different in the atmosphere, like there's just eyeballs all over you in the forest, and that eerie silence definitely overwhelms you, and you just know that something's off. It does sound like Michelle has been through a lot, and these creatures are connected with people who have experienced a lot of things in their lives, and people who like to spend a lot of time in nature, people who like to be on their own by themselves. And yeah, I think it's interesting that these creatures took a liking to you and your family. And yeah, you mentioned that both of your twin brothers had disabilities in their lives, and maybe that's why these creatures allowed them to approach them, or maybe they couldn't pick up on them. What are your thoughts and theories about this? Do you think maybe these creatures just aren't able to tune in on certain people, or they're able to highly tune into people and they seem to gravitate towards certain individuals? I don't really know, but the theory is there and it makes me wonder. I just think it's extremely cool that you got to hang out in the Pacific Northwest as a child out in the forest, and that just sounds so peaceful to me. I'd love to go there one day and visit, but of course it would only be for a short amount of time, and you'd have to live there to really enjoy the area and appreciate it for what it is, because it's so vast. Maybe there is somebody listening right now to this podcast who has had an encounter in Oregon State, possibly Northern California, or even Washington, who hasn't told anyone, and they're very adamant about keeping this hush-hush, but if you're willing, I'd love to hear about it. But anyways, I appreciate everyone for listening. Thank you guys for tuning in, and until the next one, take care and be safe.